Okay, I am Hannibal Khaing, Senior Enterprise Data Modeler, CDO, CTO, and Data Center Administrator. This video documentation is going to answer two questions. The first question is, what is email? And, and the second question is, that's a real question. Someone has asked me to explain what email is. Um, and the second question is, why do they need real-time data versus batch processing data, which is cheaper to implement than real-time data? And secondly, they wanted to know, why can't they just aggregate the batch data instead of using uh, real-time business intelligence? Okay, first of all, there are several people who don't know what email is. And that's actually unbelievably common, because there are some people who simply have not updated their skills. And when they started in the corporate world, there was no email. Um, but email is kind of like sending a fax without a telephone. So instead of sending a piece of paper to a phone number, you're sending something that you type on a screen or something that you import into a screen to a text email address. So it's just like a fax, but it's electronic and you don't need a phone to send it. So essentially, it's basically sending text through a transport protocol, just like a phone does, except it's just a different protocol. The real-time data thing, the reason that you need real-time data primarily is proactive business management. So you need to be proactive when you manage a business. You have to know what's going to happen before it happens. And the way that you know that is with real-time data, because if you have real-time data combined with the diagnostic analysis from historical data, you can then produce a predictive analysis and tell what is going to happen before it happens, giving you a chance and heads up and a lot of leeway to manage the situation before it's too late. And then you have to shift to reactive management. And additionally, if you have the predictive analysis and good data quality, you can create a prescriptive analysis. So you give yourself options, and then you can calculate return on investment, you can calculate costs, you can calculate risk, all of that in the predictive and prescriptive analysis, and then you can make a data-driven, proactive decision. Now, batch processing, you can't do any of that. It's cheaper, but you lose the proactive management. And everybody knows, if you're doing reactive management, it's going to cost you way more than implementing real-time data. Reactive management, you can lose 33% of your revenue because you can't manage the business proactively very easily. You can lose the whole company if you get enough lawsuits. So that batch processing stuff was supposed to have been replaced in 1967. But it stayed around because, let's face it, people didn't update their skills, and they kept hiring the cheapest. And so the big problem is that a lot of the executives, they choose their vendors by price, not by capability. So if it's a lower price, that does not mean that it's really a lower total cost of ownership. So if somebody sells you a data system from the 1970s for $2 million versus a $3 billion modern data system with real-time data, business intelligence, enterprise resource planning, supply chain management, MPP, all those things, it'll look like that $2 million application is cheaper on paper. But if it doesn't do all the things that this stuff that I make does, you can lose, the whole company. But what, bare minimum, 33% of your revenue, just from the inefficiencies and the reactive management. So, mine looks more expensive, but if you got $100 billion company and you're losing $33 billion a year just from inefficiencies and reactive management, the $3 billion that I'm charging is nothing in comparison. And plus, the data models that I create last 30 to 50 years. So you make it one time, you got it for 30 years at least. Uh, and $3 billion spread out over 30 years is negligible when you have $100 billion company. Uh, so the other thing about the batch processing is that has no fraud deterrence. There's a thing called batch processing fraud, where when people want to steal from a company, say if there's something in the accounting system where they're using batch processing data, say for invoices or something like that, um, once the batch process is finished, they can easily go in there and change the bottom line numbers and falsify it. And then the reports that you pull from that data is also automatically falsified. Uh, and then the aggregate data thing is the same thing. When you aggregate the data, you basically freeze it in time, and you lose the ability to pull an ad hoc report anytime you want for any date range or any time range. So when you aggregate it, they aggregate it for a specific time range and nothing else. Say if you get an aggregate report that's for last quarter and you want one for this month, which is 2 months into the next quarter, you can't pull that report because it's frozen for last quarter. And there is no data for this quarter yet until the end of the quarter. Similarly, if you have daily reports or regulatory reports, um, in some cases, a batch process can take 24 to 48 hours to complete. So if you need a report immediately, like say you get a subpoena from a judge, and some of these judges, they'll charge you $2 million a day until you get them the data that they want. So if you get a subpoena and you can't deliver that data for 2 days, that's $4 million just for a report that you should have been able to produce in less than a second. But you can't do that without the real-time data. That's the problem. So all these people saying cheap, 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 cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. They don't understand what they're talking about. They don't know what they're talking about. They're looking at the moment without understanding the big picture. Like for example, there was one bank that I worked for briefly. I did an analysis for them. They had 57 fraud cases in court. The data was in such a bad state that they could not find the data requested by the judges in all 57 cases. So each one of those judges was charging them $2 million a day. $114 million a day. And now that bank is bankrupt. They got bought out by another bank because they couldn't take all those fines. And they were very arrogant when I went in and said, look, you need to fix this now. And that was like 2008 when I told them that. And I think they went down in 2024. And they were so arrogant. They're like, we can't go down. We can't lose this bank. This is a multi-billion-dollar bank. We have billions and billions of dollars in assets. But if you're getting $114 million a day in fines, billions of dollars in regulatory compliance fines, hundreds of billions of dollars in fraud, there's no amount of money that you can have that can stop you from going out of business. And because they didn't have that real-time data, one, they couldn't detect fraud. Two, they could not find anybody's data on cue from a judge with a subpoena. Just those two things were the end of that bank. And if it wasn't the only one, over 500 banks had that same problem. And when the 2008 financial crisis hit, 500 banks went down and stayed down. They're all gone. And they say, oh, we can't justify the cost of this real-time data thing. We're just going to do the batch processing. We've been doing it since the 1970s. Well, it's not the 1970s. The laws have changed. Since Enron and WorldCom, the regulatory laws are drastically different than they were when batch processing was adequate in the 1970s, or 1967 to the 1970s to be precise. So if you're still doing batch processing and all that old stuff, it's only a matter of time before you go down. And you're going to stay down because those fines, they're not playing with those fines. One fine is $3 billion now.